There's a fear more terrifying than poverty, a cold dread that settles deep in your bones. It's the fear of becoming invisible, not in a supernatural way, but in the most human way possible. To be alive, to breathe the same air as everyone else, yet to be looked through, as if you were nothing more than a ghost in your own home. It's when people stop seeing your eyes and see only the dirt on your hands, using it as the sole measure of your worth. There are some pains you can't scream out. You can only swallow them, again and again, with every meal seasoned by contempt. I invite you to listen to my story, the story of a man named Ronan, which I call Dignity in the Dirt. Come, see for yourself how, when a good man is pushed to the very edge, the strength found in silence can orchestrate a downfall so spectacular, it realigns the very stars. Stick with me, because the ending is a reckoning you won't want to miss. 12 years. For 12 years, I believed I had it all. I had Aurelia, the woman I'd loved from the moment I first saw her in a public park, reading under a maple tree while I was trimming the rose bushes. Our love had grown like a wildflower, resilient and beautiful without needing much fuss. And I had Ronan's Gardens, my small landscaping company, which I had built from nothing but a rusty lawnmower and a beat-up pickup truck. By the world's standards, we weren't rich, but we were sovereign. Every evening, I'd come home smelling of damp earth, fresh-cut grass, and honest sweat, and Aurelia would wrap her arms around me and say it was the smell of happiness, the smell of a real man. The sky above my life didn't shatter all at once. It began with a series of small hairline cracks. A brutal economic recession hit. Big contracts were cancelled overnight. Loyal clients, people whose gardens I'd tended for years, started tightening their belts. I fought back. I sold the new truck, worked twice as hard, doing the job of 3 men myself, but it was like trying to hold back a flood with my bare hands. The day finally came. I stood before my small, rented office, a bankruptcy notice in my hand, feeling the strength drain from my body. I hadn't just lost a business. I had lost a piece of my identity. That was when the Sinclairs, Aurelia's family, swept into our lives, not as rescuers, but as predators disguised as saviors. Her father, Alistair Sinclair, was a real estate tycoon, a shark in a bespoke suit. Wealth dripped from him, from the Patek Philippe on his wrist to the gleaming crocodile leather of his shoes. He had never approved of me. In his eyes, I was just the dirt digger who had somehow charmed his precious daughter. Every time we met, he would glance at my calloused hands with a smirk, a silent, cutting disdain. They visited our small, mortgaged home the evening the news of my bankruptcy broke. The house suddenly felt cramped, shabby under their opulent presence. Alistair sat on the sofa I had built myself, his eyes scanning the room before he made his offer. His voice was devoid of sympathy, laced only with the casual authority of the powerful. "There's a guest house on the west wing of our estate. You two can move in there. And you, Ronan," he said, his eyes finally landing on me. "My grounds need a full-time caretaker. I'll put you on a payroll. Better to be a servant to family than to starve on the street." I felt the blood rush to my head. It wasn't an offer. It was a beautifully worded sentence of servitude. I looked at Aurelia, praying for a sign of defiance, a shake of her head, a whisper that we would get through this together. But her eyes were fixed on the floorboards. She wouldn't look at me. "You should be grateful, Ronan," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "We don't have another choice." In that moment, I knew I hadn't just lost my company. I was beginning to lose my wife. We moved the next day. As I carried the last box, filled with my old, worn gardening tools, through the magnificent iron gates of the Sinclair estate, I felt like I was stepping into a gilded cage. The gates clanged shut behind me, a sound of finality. My sky had well and truly fallen. The guest house was beautiful, far grander than the home we had just left. It had every modern convenience, a window overlooking a sapphire blue pool, and its own small garden filled with lavender. But the air inside was sterile and suffocating. It didn't smell of happiness. It smelled of failure and pity. Alistair called the wage he paid me a stipend, a pittance that was just enough to cover gas for the mower and a few groceries. He made it clear that I was living on his charity. My job title was gardener, but my role was everything man. Fixing a leaky faucet, unclogging a drain, repainting a fence, even skimming leaves from the pool. I went from being my own boss to being an indentured servant in my wife's family home. But the humiliation wasn't in the labor itself. It was in the way Alistair orchestrated it. He wasn't just my employer. He was my tormentor. And his goal was to break my spirit. On the coldest winter mornings, with snow on the ground and the temperature dipping below freezing, Alistair would summon me. He'd stand on his heated porch, sipping hot coffee, and point down at the stone walkway. "Ronan," he'd say, his breath fogging in the air. "The grout between these stones looks a bit dingy. Take a small brush and scrub it clean for me." I would have to kneel on the frozen stone, my bare hands turning red and numb, and scrub each individual crevice while he watched, a look of immense satisfaction on his face. His cruelty had a theatrical flair. He had a fondness for expensive cigars. Often, as I worked, he would stroll by, puffing away. When the cigar was half smoked, he would casually flick it, ensuring it landed near my hands as I knelt in the dirt. The first time, I recoiled. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "What's the matter? Afraid of a little heat? Pick it up. Clean my property, that's what I pay you for." Gritting my teeth, I would have to pick up the still hot cigar, feeling the sear against my skin, and silently drop it into the trash. I couldn't fight back, because every time I looked up, I would see Aurelia watching from an upstairs window. She saw everything, and she said nothing. Margot, my mother-in-law, was a different kind of monster. She was a viper wrapped in silk. Her voice was always sweet, her words always poisoned. Her favorite pastime was hosting lavish tea parties for her high society friends. Those were my lowest moments. She would deliberately call me over while I was hauling a heavy, pungent bag of fertilizer, my shirt soaked with sweat. "Ronan, darling, come say hello to the ladies," she would coo. I'd have to drop the bag, wipe my filthy hands on my pants, and stand before a coven of impeccably dressed women. She would then loop her arm through mine and introduce me with a dazzling smile. "This is Ronan, our estate manager. You see, ladies, good help is so hard to find these days. But keeping a failure in the family, much, much easier." Their tinkling, polite laughter was like 1,000 tiny needles piercing my skin. I could only nod, mutter a greeting and retreat, feeling their condescending eyes burn into my back. Every single day, I swallowed these flavors. The taste of dirt, of sweat, of fertilizer, and of absolute humiliation. The only thing that kept me in that hell was not gratitude, but a desperate, fading hope for Aurelia. I clung to the memory of the woman I had married, the woman who once said my sweat smelled of happiness. I told myself she was just scared, that she was suffering in her own way, that our love was strong enough to weather this storm. I was a fool. People change, and Aurelia's transformation was more brutal than any of her parents' calculated cruelties. It started subtly. Claims about the dirt I tracked in from the garden. "Ronan, can you please take your boots off outside? This is a Persian rug." Then came the request to sleep in the guest house's living room. "The smell of soil and sweat," she explained, avoiding my eyes. "It gets into the Egyptian cotton sheets." I tried to tell her I showered thoroughly, but she just shrugged. "It's ingrained in you now." And just like that, our marital bed was severed by a cold, invisible wall. The distance grew into a chasm. She stopped calling me by my name. It was just, "Hey," or a dismissive wave of her hand. When her friends came over, she would introduce me with a forced, awkward cough. "Oh, he manages the grounds for my father." It was a lie that made me feel less than a servant. A servant, at least, has a name. I was reduced to a vague function, a walking, breathing cover-up for her husband's failure. The Sinclair dinner table was a grand stage, and I was the one person not invited to the performance. They dined at 8, at a long mahogany table that could seat 20, under a glittering crystal chandelier. I was never asked to join them. My dinner consisted of leftovers from their lunch, set aside for me in the kitchen by the maid. I would eat alone in the cold, cavernous kitchen, listening to the distant clinking of silverware and the sound of their laughter. I could hear Aurelia's laugh, a bright, carefree sound she hadn't shared with me in months. She was talking about a shopping trip to Milan, an upcoming concert, a future that clearly had no space for me. The final, fatal blow came on our 13th wedding anniversary. I'd spent the entire day secretly creating a gift for her. Using colourful pebbles I'd collected, I made a small mosaic in a secluded corner of the garden, a recreation of the day we met under the maple tree. I poured every last ounce of my remaining love into it. That night, I waited for her in the guest house. I'd cooked a simple meal of her favourite dishes and lit a single candle. I wanted to remind her of the us that used to be. She never came home. It wasn't until after midnight that a sleek sports car pulled up. Aurelia stumbled out, reeking of alcohol and expensive perfume, leaning on the arm of another man. She saw me and frowned. "What are you doing up?" "Oh, right, the anniversary. I forgot. I was at a party." She didn't even glance at the table I'd set. She walked straight into the bedroom and slammed the door. I sat there alone, the candle burning down to a stub, staring at my pebble mosaic through the window. I realized then that the woman I loved was truly gone. The person in that room was just a stranger wearing her face. Our love hadn't just been replaced by contempt. It had been murdered by her own hand. When love dies, the pain doesn't just vanish. It transforms. For me, it morphed into a cold, terrifying quiet. I stopped hoping. I stopped feeling. I simply performed my duties like an automaton. I pruned the hedges, mowed the lawn, fixed the plumbing. I bowed my head and accepted every insult without a word. My silence pleased them. They thought they had finally broken me, that the wild animal had been tamed. They had no idea that when a man falls completely silent, it's because he has started to watch. My invisibility in that castle became my greatest asset. They let their guard down around the gardener. They took sensitive business calls while I was trimming the hedges right beside them. They left files on the patio table, confident I was too simple to understand them. They treated me like part of the scenery, no more sentient than a garden gnome. And so, I began to see the cracks in the seemingly impenetrable fortress of the Sinclair Empire. Alistair was not just wealthy. He was corrupt to the core. I started noticing unusual meetings. Unmarked black cars would arrive late at night. Men in sharp suits with hard faces would disappear into Alistair's study for hours. Sometimes, while watering the plants near his office window, I'd catch snippets of conversation. Words like rezoning, permits, the inspector, and a quiet resolution. One afternoon, while clearing leaves near the office trash bins, I found a shredded piece of a blueprint. On a whim, I pocketed the pieces. Later that night, I pieced them together. It was a partial map of a protected nature preserve north of the city. I knew that land. Aurelia and I had hiked there once. It was legally untouchable, but on this blueprint, it was marked Sinclair Resort Complex, Phase 1. A cold chill went down my spine. A few days later, another piece fell into place. Alistair had a meeting on the patio with a man who looked like a city official. After the man left, Alistair, distracted by a phone call, left his briefcase behind. As I moved to wipe down the table, I glanced inside. My heart skipped a beat. Stacked neatly next to a file of land deeds was a thick brick of cash. I quickly closed the briefcase and left it untouched. When Alistair came back for it, he didn't even thank me. He just gave me a dismissive look and walked away. He had no suspicion. In his world, the help was illiterate, incapable of understanding what they saw. My suspicion grew into a quiet obsession. I had no plan, not yet, but an instinct told me to keep watching, keep listening. I paid attention to everything: the phone calls, the visitors, the discarded documents. I was like a wounded animal, hiding in the shadows, silently studying its predator. The pain inside me was slowly crystallizing into a purpose. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for certain. A castle built on greed and arrogance could not stand forever. And I, the invisible gardener, would be the one to find its fatal weakness. I thought my heart had turned to stone, that nothing could hurt me anymore. I had learned to coexist with the Sinclair's contempt, to channel my pain into silent observation. I was wrong. Some betrayals cut deeper than any insult, because they come from the one person you once would have died for. It happened on a stormy night in October. The wind howled, whipping tree branches against the windows like skeletal fingers. A pipe burst in the main hall of the mansion, and water began to flood the marble floor. The staff had gone home. Naturally, the estate manager was summoned. I pulled on my raincoat, grabbed my toolbox, and headed into the main house. The grand hall was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the porch light. I found the leak and got to work. The job required me to access a small utility closet located just behind Alistair's library. The heavy oak door to the library wasn't shut properly, leaving a small gap. As I fumbled with a wrench, I heard voices from within. It was Alistair, Margot, and Aurelia. And by some cruel twist of fate, they were talking about me. Alistair's voice was a low, authoritative rumble. Aurelia, you cannot be tethered to a failed gardener for the rest of your life. His presence in this house is an embarrassment. I've already found a suitable replacement for him in your life. Thomas, son of the federal construction conglomerate. He's young, ambitious, and most importantly, he's in our league. He's coming for brunch next week. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I waited, I prayed for Aurelia to scream, to protest, to say that she was married, that she loved me. But there was only silence. Then Margot's voice, sweet as poisoned honey. Thomas is a wonderful boy, dear. I've seen pictures, very handsome. And his family's fortune is large enough for you to buy anything you desire without ever looking at a price tag. You deserve better, my love. Still, I waited. One last, flickering ember of hope waited for my wife. And then her voice came, devoid of all emotion, as cold and brittle as the rain outside. Is his fortune large enough for me to buy back that villa in Paris I've always wanted, Father? That question. It wasn't a knife to the heart. It was a bomb detonating in my chest. Everything shattered. 13 years of love, the vows, the memories, all of it incinerated by a single transactional question. Alistair let out a triumphant laugh. 10 times over. My daughter will have the best. As for Ronan, let him stick around a little longer. His pathetic presence will make Thomas look like a knight in shining armor. Once you're settled with Thomas, I'll throw him out on the street without a penny. I stood in the darkness of the closet, water from the broken pipe dripping onto my shoulder, cold and sharp. But I felt nothing. My heart was no longer hurting. It was gone. In that moment, a strange clarity washed over me. It wasn't sadness or despair. It was a cold, lucid rage. Love was dead. In its place, a purpose formed, clear and hard as a diamond. I was no longer enduring for her. From now on, I would endure for myself. I quietly tightened the final bolt on the pipe, finished my work, and walked back to the guest house. The rain had stopped. The sky was clear, and in my mind, everything was too. The game had changed, and it was my turn to play. The cold rage that settled in my soul gave me a kind of superhuman focus. I wasted no more energy on grief or resentment. I woke each morning with a single driving purpose: to gather the evidence that would bring down the cruel, fraudulent empire of the Sinclair family. My submissiveness was no longer a sign of defeat. It was my camouflage. I was still the silent, head-bowed gardener, but my eyes were now as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. My invisibility was my greatest weapon. They never saw me. Alistair continued to conduct his shady business on the open-air patio, believing his gardener was too stupid to comprehend the complexities of finance and real estate law. He was wrong. I began my work methodically. I bought a cheap, untraceable burner phone, the kind used only for calls and basic photos, and hid it in the hollow of an old tree behind the guest house. It became my secret archive. Whenever Alistair left a file unattended, I would move in. With swift, practiced movements, I would photograph every page. Contracts with shell corporations, inflated invoices for phantom construction projects, email exchanges with city officials about greasing the wheels for permits. I spent my nights studying these documents, looking up every term I didn't understand. Slowly, the vast, intricate web of Alistair's corruption began to take shape. My work as a gardener gave me the perfect cover to be everywhere. Pruning the rose bushes beneath his office window, I could overhear his phone calls. I memorized names, dates, and figures. Sorting through the trash, I would painstakingly inspect shredded documents. Sometimes, the most damning evidence is thrown away. I found a bank statement detailing suspicious wire transfers to an offshore account, and the draft of a letter in which Alistair blackmailed a business partner. Even Margot and Aurelia, in their blissful ignorance, contributed to my collection. At their extravagant parties, they would boast about their latest acquisitions. "Alistair just bought me this necklace, darling. It's a limited edition," Margot would say. "Daddy got me the new sports car, just for running errands," Aurelia would brag to her friends. I documented it all, cross-referencing their spending with Alistair's declared income. The discrepancy was astronomical, a blatant, undeniable case of tax evasion. I became a silent archivist, a ghost gliding through their castle of lies. I recorded dates, times, and locations of every meeting, every phone call. I backed up every photo and note onto a tiny USB drive that I wore on a cord around my neck, hidden beneath my work shirt. For 6 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was Ronan, the pathetic, broken gardener. By night, I was a nameless investigator, meticulously piecing together the evidence that would be their undoing. My patience was like cultivating a rare plant, but instead of waiting for it to flower, I was waiting for it to grow tall enough to blot out the Sinclair family's sun. Living a double life is an exhausting, soul-crushing endeavor. By day, I wore the mask of subservience. I had to swallow insults, pretend not to hear the whispers, and bow my head to the very people I despised. Every time Alistair tossed me a few dollars and said, "Get yourself a coffee," I had to force a smile and thank him. Every time Margot demanded I polish her dirt-caked riding boots, I had to obey. Every time Aurelia walked past me, as if I didn't exist, I had to pretend my heart didn't clench. This constant suppression required an iron will. There were moments when the rage inside me felt like a physical volcano, threatening to erupt. I wanted to scream at them, to hurl my tools against their marble walls, to let them know I was not their dog. But then I would remember my purpose. An outburst now would ruin everything. The most satisfying revenge isn't a flash of anger. It is a calculated, devastating collapse. So I bottled it all up, converting every ounce of rage into fuel for my patience. The fear of discovery was my constant companion. Every night, as I reviewed the evidence on my hidden phone, the slightest sound outside would make my heart leap into my throat. Had someone seen the light from my window? Had Alistair decided to take a late-night stroll and found the phone in the tree? The stress was a physical weight. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. Margot even commented on it once, her voice dripping with mock concern. "You look dreadful, Ronan. The gardening must be taking a toll on you." I just smiled weakly, knowing the exhaustion came not from physical labor, but from the immense weight of the silence I was keeping. I had one close call, a moment that almost brought everything crashing down. It was a late afternoon, and Alistair was signing papers on the porch. He got an urgent call and rushed inside, leaving a folder on the table. This was my chance. I quickly scanned the area, saw no one, and pulled out my phone, snapping pictures as fast as I could. Just then, I heard his footsteps returning. Panic seized me. There was no time to hide the phone. On pure instinct, I tossed it into a thick azalea bush nearby and grabbed my pruning shears, pretending to be trimming dead blossoms. Alistair came out, frowning at me. "What are you doing here?" I fought to keep my voice steady. "Just trimming this bush, sir. It was getting overgrown." He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. I could feel a cold sweat prickle the back of my neck. Then, he just shrugged, picked up his folder, and went back inside. Only after he was gone did I allow myself to breathe, my legs trembling. I retrieved my phone from the bush, my hands shaking. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing just how dangerous this path was. But there was no turning back. I was in too deep. The weight of my silence would one day be lifted, and when it was, it would crush them all. After nearly a year of living in that gilded hell, I had everything. The tiny USB drive around my neck now held enough power to level an empire. It was a comprehensive indictment of Alistair Sinclair's life of greed, fraud, and cruelty. It contained copies of phantom contracts, photos of inflated invoices, audio recordings of incriminating phone calls, and a detailed ledger of bribes paid to city officials. It also held a forensic financial analysis, comparing the Sinclairs' obscenely lavish lifestyle with their paltry tax returns. It was a ticking time bomb, and my finger was on the detonator. The time had come to act. I knew I couldn't expose this myself. I needed professionals, people with the power to bring the full force of the law down on them. I spent several nights doing my research. I found the name of a renowned investigative journalist, a man nicknamed the Fox Hunter for his tenacity in exposing corporate corruption. I also found the direct contact for the Financial Crimes Unit of the Internal Revenue Service, IRS. I had to deliver the evidence securely, without leaving a trace. I couldn't use any computer on the Sinclair property. I assumed their network was monitored. I waited for a weekend, used the excuse of buying fertilizer, and drove my old truck to a small town 30 miles away. I found a public library, a quiet, anonymous place where I could work unnoticed. Sitting in a secluded corner, I plugged the USB drive into the library computer. My heart pounded against my ribs. I carefully composed 2 anonymous emails. The first was to the journalist, with the subject line, "The biggest story of your career." The second was to the IRS. Subject: Evidence of massive tax fraud and money laundering by Alistair Sinclair. In each email, I attached the entirety of my files, along with a brief, concise letter explaining the context and highlighting the most critical pieces of evidence. I signed neither with my name. I simply wrote, "A gardener." After hitting send on both emails, I sat motionless for a few minutes. A strange feeling washed over me. Not joy, not even satisfaction. It was a cold, quiet peace. The peace of a soldier who has completed his final, vital mission. I had set the last dominoes in place. Now, all I had to do was wait for an invisible hand to topple the first one. I wiped the library computer clean of any trace of my presence. I took the USB drive, snapped it in half, and threw the pieces into 2 different trash cans on my way back. I didn't need it anymore. The story was now in motion. When I returned to the Sinclair estate, everything was exactly as I had left it. Alistair was reading the financial news on the porch. Margot was instructing the maid on how to polish silver. Aurelia was trying on a new dress she had ordered online. They were blissfully unaware that a hurricane was forming just over the horizon. They were still living in their perfect, fragile world, not knowing that I had already hollowed out its foundations. Their peaceful days were numbered, and I would be right here, standing in the garden, to watch it all come down. The hurricane made landfall 2 weeks later, on a perfect Sunday morning. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The Sinclairs were hosting an elegant brunch on the back lawn to formally introduce Thomas, Aurelia's hand-picked future husband, to their inner circle. The grounds were immaculate. Tables draped in white linen were adorned with fresh flowers, and a string quartet played softly in the background. High society was in full attendance, sipping champagne, laughing, and discussing their upcoming vacations to Monaco and the Swiss Alps. I was in my usual place, at the edge of the garden in my work clothes, pretending to tend the tulips. I was part of the scenery, a living statue no one noticed. But inside, the quiet patience had been replaced by a taut, humming anticipation. And then, it began. Not with a clap of thunder, but with the distant wail of sirens, growing steadily louder. The chatter died down. Heads turned. From the main gate, a convoy of 3 black sedans and 2 police cruisers sped onto the property, their tires tearing across the perfectly manicured lawn. The doors flew open. Federal agents in tactical vests, armed and resolute, swarmed the area. The brunch party fell into a stunned, dead silence, broken only by the incongruous melody of the string quartet. A man in a sharp suit, clearly the agent in charge, strode directly to Alistair. He held up a badge and a warrant. "Alistair Sinclair," his voice boomed across the lawn. "You are under arrest for federal charges of fraud, bribery, and tax evasion. You have the right to remain silent." Alistair's face cycled through a series of emotions, from smug disbelief to panic, and finally to purple-faced rage. "Do you have any idea who I am? This is a mistake," he bellowed. But no one was listening. 2 agents moved in, yanked his arms behind his back, and secured them with handcuffs. The sharp, metallic click echoed across the silent lawn like a judge's gavel. Chaos erupted. Guests scrambled to leave. Margot shrieked and fainted dramatically onto the grass. Aurelia stood frozen, her beautiful face a mask of pale horror, her designer dress looking garish and absurd in the midst of the wreckage. Agents began plastering seizure notices on the doors of the mansion. The Sinclair empire, so arrogant and indestructible, was crumbling into dust in a matter of minutes. And then, through the chaos, Aurelia saw me. She ran, stumbling on the grass, her face streaked with tears and mascara. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my dirt-stained sleeve. "Ronan, you have to help him. You have to tell them it's a mistake."
You have savings, don't you? We can use it to hire the best lawyers.
I looked down at her face I had adored for 12 years. But now, I saw only a stranger. Slowly, deliberately, I unpeeled her fingers from my arm, the way I would remove a toxic vine from a healthy tree. I looked directly into her eyes and said, my voice completely level, "Savings? I only have the stipend your father gave me. I have no money." I paused, letting the words sink in. "And you know, Aurelia," I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "the person who sent all the evidence to the IRS and the press was the invisible gardener you were always so ashamed to introduce." The look in her eyes shifted from desperation to confusion, then to dawning, absolute horror. She staggered backward and collapsed onto the grass. She finally understood. I didn't say another word. I turned my back on her, on all of it. I walked down the stone path I had once scrubbed on my knees. I walked through the iron gates that had once been my prison. I walked out into the world and did not look back. Behind me, an empire was in ashes. Before me was a wide open, empty sky. I had lost everything, but on that day, I got myself back. I walked away from the Sinclair estate that day with nothing but the clothes on my back and an empty wallet. Yet, I felt lighter than I had in years. The crushing weight of humiliation, of grief, and of my vengeful mission was finally lifted. I filed for divorce immediately. The proceedings were quick. Aurelia, stripped of her wealth and status, didn't contest it. She and her mother, I later heard, had to move into a small, rented apartment, facing the scorn of the very society they had tried so hard to impress. As for me, I started over. With the last of my old savings, I bought another used pickup truck and some basic tools. I didn't try to rebuild a big company. I took small jobs, tending small gardens for ordinary people. I was working with the earth again, finding joy in coaxing life from the soil. I'd come home in the evening to my small, rented room, still covered in sweat, but it was the smell of freedom, the smell of reclaimed dignity. I wasn't rich, but I was my own man again, and that was more valuable than any fortune. My friends, the story of Ronan ends here. Thank you for walking with me on this long journey, from the depths of despair to the moment I found my way back into the light. Looking back, it's easy to call this a perfect revenge story. But I'd like for us to look a little deeper. Alistair, Margot, and Aurelia weren't truly destroyed by me. They were destroyed by the very things they worshipped: insatiable greed, blinding arrogance, and a value system that measures a human being by their bank account instead of their character. They built their castle on a foundation of moral rot. It was always destined to collapse. I just gave it the first, gentle push. My real victory wasn't the moment Alistair was handcuffed, or when Aurelia begged for my help. My true victory came much earlier. It was the moment I realized my worth wasn't tied to my business, or to anyone else's approval. It was rooted in my own two hands, in my capacity for honest work, and in a core of self-respect that no one could take from me unless I allowed them to. They could take my company, they could insult my person, but they couldn't take the man I was. This story shows us that silence and patience are not always weaknesses. In the hands of the wise, they are tools for observation, for gathering strength, for waiting for the right moment to act. The most devastating storms are often born from the quietest days. And human dignity, it's like a seed. You can bury it under the rocks of contempt and scorn, but as long as it has a sliver of light, a belief in itself, it will find a way to grow, pushing through the darkness to reach the sun. We live in a world that often judges people by their cover, by what they own. But I hope my story serves as a small, gentle reminder for all of us to look deeper, to cherish the core values that truly define us. Kindness, integrity, and self-respect are the only assets that never lose their value. If my story resonated with you, or if you've ever felt invisible in your own life, please don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Every one of your stories and thoughts means the world to us and gives us the strength to keep sharing.
Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Take care, and I'll see you again soon.